Council, I'll just give an overview first. Council had proposed public transport rate services in Thames Coromandel, Hauraki and Matamata-Piako districts, with some new services also. These rate services and new services are an amendment from our long-term plan, hence the consultation. After consultation from the 1st through to the 30th of April, we are today at the point of hearings and deliberations. The final decision is on the 20th of June. So with that, I now declare the meeting officially open and call for apologies. I have one apology from Councillor Tipa-Mahuta. There being no other apologies, I will move that. Do I have a seconder? Yep, Katarina. A second. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried.
But just to comment, Mr. Chairman, is that Councillor Mahuta does concern me. She's been called on for a lot of things from the government to do, and you can see the list of things. But you know, right from the 10-year plan, that was a 3-day event. You know, we didn't see Councillor Litchmark there at all, and I think Councillor Mahuta was there for about 2 hours. So it does actually, you know, the heavy lifting is done by a few sometimes, and I do find it concerning. Thank you,
Councillor. I'm aware that Councillor Tipa-Mahuta may actually join us later in the meeting, because and I understand she has a commitment earlier on.
Be good if she could.
Thank you for that. Confirmation.
Mr. Yes. Chair, I just want to make a clarity on when attendances of councillors are inappropriate subject to be discussed.
Yes.
I don't like someone being discussed when they're not here.
Fair enough.
I don't care who it is. And I don't think any of us voted for her anyway. And she has a constitutional right to her. Okay. Right. So I need you, if I can possibly, subject. And how does the councillor who's not at the table at the time answers it?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I will rule that those particular comments be set aside from this meeting because it's not relevant to this meeting. So, and I will record Councillor Tipa-Mahuta as being an apology for legitimate reasons. Thank you. Confirmation of agenda. The confirmation of agenda. The agenda of the meeting of today has been circulated, confirmed as the business of the meeting, and the meeting may sit longer than 2 hours continuously, but I'm going to do my best as chair to keep things moving along. And it may continue longer than 6 hours, but if it continues to 6 hours, I'm a failure. So you can point to me and have me stand down a bit like 6 hours, including adjournments.
I move the confirmation agenda.
Thank you very much, Russ. Seconder, please. Jennifer Nicol. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Now, any disclosures of interest are carried, by the way, particularly in relation to any matter that might be arising at this hearing meeting. There being none, we'll take that as no further disclosures. Now we're going to item 4 on page 3, and that is the report on the LTP amendment hearings report. And Janine, please address.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, councillors. This report is largely procedural. It really just summarises and presents for you the submissions that we have received in relation to the LTP amendment. Just noting in terms of, as the Chair has indicated, consultation was undertaken over the period of the 1st to the 30th of April. And in response to that, we received 155 submissions. We have included within this report a full copy of the consultation document, which was the basis for the engagement that's been undertaken, just so that councillors are familiar with the information that was provided and the questions that were asked. So on that, Mr. Chair, happy to take any questions from the committee. Mark, whether there's anything else you wanted to note in terms of this report.
Mark is our Director of... so Mark, would you like to make any comments just before we lead into the actual submissions and sound going in and out here?
Through you, Mr. Chair, nothing to add to the materials that have been provided, just noting that that this process did run a little in parallel with a process of the Public Transport Business Improvement Review and seeking some feedback on that review, and including some very similar questions, in particular as it related to responsibles for rating for public transport services. And in the second item on the agenda, the actual the deliberations report, which will be considered later as an attachment to that, you will also find submissions on the business improvement review from those three councils. So just drawing that connection there, Mr. Chair. Beyond that, nothing to add.
Right, you'll see in the agenda we have all the amendments to the long-term plan listed in our agenda. And also the all of the submissions as well. So with that, we can, I'm just looking at the time here because our first presenters are currently here. I'm just checking because we're slightly ahead of the time in the agenda. Greg Morton is here and going to be online speaking to the Waikato District Health Board submission, Public Health Unit. So Greg Morton, are you online there?
Yes, I am. Hopefully you can hear me. Okay.
Thank you, Greg. Loud and clear. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and hearing committee members. I have a presentation which hopefully is able to be put up that I can speak to. But in the interim, I'll introduce myself. My name is Greg Morton, and I'm the Senior Manager for Planning and Engagement at Waikato DHB. And I'm also involved in transport planning work that links to health. So I'm pleased to be able to be here today to speak on behalf of our District Health Board and Public Health Unit submission on the annual plan amendment. Next slide, please.
We've just got a technical difficulty. Won't be a second.
That's okay. I'll just speak to the next slide. We have a sustainability commitment as an organisation because, yep, as part of central government, thank you, we are also doing our bit to look at how we can reduce emissions and contribute to sustainability. And transport is part of that. I think fuel and travel for us accounts for about 15% of our emissions as an organisation. So we have quite a commitment to that, and also see what is proposed in the amendment as contributing to sustainable outcomes and improved sustainability. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I've combined quite a bit of information, but I wanted to put up the existing services which were in the consultation document, as well as a map I included in our DHB submission, which represents households with no access to a vehicle. And that's represented in various shades of orange up there on the map on the right. And I've also overlaid some proxies for the proposed services. I appreciate that the exact service routes are not yet determined, but I wanted to do that to help show for you that the services, some of those services that are proposed, will definitely help meet the needs of households that have no access to a car. Between 2 and 5% of households in that lighter orange area up the Firth of Coromandel coast, and as an example, include households that have no access to a car. The other thing I've done is indicated in orange, in bright yellow, the Thames area and a proposed health services, social services hub, which is proposed there. So a proposal has been accepted by government on this as part of the new health system change. I can't speak in detail to what was in the proposal, but I can suggest if you want to find out more about that you have a speak with Taima Campbell at Te Korowai Hauora. But the proposal includes an integrated hub within Thames, and these services that are proposed, these public transport services, will help link people who have few options or no option to that hub or those services that will be based in Thames over time. I've also put up on this slide that we have about 4% of our staff at Waikato DHB live in the combined Thames, Coromandel and Hauraki area. So that's about 350 people based upon the last time that data was collected in 2018. I've also included on the next slide a quote from a technical report. So while you have a read of that, I think it illustrates the level of need and impacts on health and wellbeing for those who experience barriers to access. And I think this amendment, which you have proposed, is going to help with that in terms of providing additional public transport services to complement services that already exist, including some community health transport services and community transport services in the Thames, Coromandel and Hauraki area. There's an opportunity for those to be linked together and networked more, and I think that will be a benefit both to you and the public transport services, but also to the community transport providers as well, who live locally and often serve a very local need in their small town or area. Thank you. Next slide, please. So this really just paints a bit of context for our submission. The evidence is really clear on the benefits, not only in terms of physical access to health services, but also on mental and physical indirect benefits, I guess. We all know that you have to do a small amount of walking to get to and from a public or community transport services, and so that has a benefit as well. It provides an option for inclusion for those who have no or very limited options in this geographic area. And it's been an ongoing discussion for groups and organisations, including Thames, Coromandel and regional councils, for some time. And the last time we picked it up was in 2021, where we had a really good conversation at that time about the problem, particularly for the Northern Coromandel, which one of the proposed services is planning to serve. That for them, they are quite isolated and have very limited options for people living in that area, and particularly in terms of accessing the wider range of services, and some of which are quite essential, that are based in Thames. I've already talked about the possible of linkages between community transport. And finally, I've just noted that the emissions reduction plan, which was released last week, includes an action to look at investigating potential for better public transport to and from rural and provincial areas. And that, to me, this proposal and amendment is definitely doing that, which is great. Thank you. Next slide, please. I just thought I'd take an opportunity to just briefly touch on some things we're doing ourselves in terms of improving sustainable transport and transport options. We've put in a new community health transport parking area at the hospital, and we have a proposed bus fare concession planned. The government jumped the gun on us a wee bit on that in terms of the 50% fare concession that's currently in place. So we're just doing some thinking at the moment with Regional Council and about when we best introduce this, if we wait till after that concludes. It's been extended, I note, in the budget, or whether we just go ahead and introduce it on top, if we can do that, if the ticketing system will allow. We also want to do some joint promotion of different travel options to and from Waikato Hospital, and we've also got a Taumarunui health bus pilot being investigated at the moment, which is out for engagement, which will enable the public to use what is currently a health bus service that enables access for people who have appointments at Waikato Hospital from Taumarunui. It stops in Te Kuiti and in Aotearoa on its way to and from Taumarunui each day. Thank you. And last slide, I've been a bit cheeky and included this figure, which shows as a representation of how local government might fit under the new health system changes. Really happy to come and speak with any of you and your respective councils or committees about the health system changes. But in essence, local government is a key part of what are being called localities, which are geographic areas which will identify collectively and agree on health and well-being needs, and local government in the little pale pinky orangey circles at the bottom is one of the core partners of what's called a locality partnership, working alongside iwi Māori partnership boards, that's the IMPB that you see on the screen, and other providers of wellbeing social services and communities. So I wanted just to highlight that for you, because the District Health Board will cease to exist from the 1st of July and be replaced by the Health New Zealand and the Māori Health Authority. And at a local area level, these locality partnerships will drive a lot of what happens in terms of health and wellbeing.
Thank you, Greg. A well-constructed and clear submission and to the point. I'll invite councillors, as we have a little bit of time, we're ahead of time, invite councillors if they have any questions or clarification. Councillors. Russ.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Greg. You've been well trained at the Waikato Regional Council, and I concur with the chairman. Excellent report. I just probably just a word of kind of caution, if I may say, with the disestablishment of the health boards. I just hope that the close contact we have with our health board and this Waikato Regional Council continues. That's my first kind of concern and warning as it's centralised. Why it's centralised, I have no idea, but we'll find out. And the second point is really, Mr. Chair, I just wish the Minister of Education had a person in contact that with the enthusiasm that you have, Greg, and the relationship we have with the Waikato Regional Council. But that's another debate, another day. But thanks for your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Teague.
Thanks, Greg, and a really great presentation. I know that you're sort of in tune with what's happening over in the Eastern Coromandel, because you've been to meetings and so on in your role, and you mentioned one element of the people who would use public transport are transport disadvantaged and those without a car, but there's also a large number of people on high deprivation index areas, and 30% of the population over that way is aged over 65, which is another demographic. So I'm just wondering, from your sort of soundings over that way, what your impression is of the level of need and demand for a service like this. That's my first question.
I can concur with you. It is bigger than just those households without a car. Many of them are households with older people, obviously, but as you say, the proportion of the population that is aged over 65 is growing, so that need will also grow. And while we are looking to try and provide remote access to health services where we can, physical access is still the case for some health services and will be for some time.
The second question relates to also your sort of impression of a question around affordability. So if a service was going to cost in the region of somewhere between $5 and $15 a year for those who had a direct benefit, those who had an indirect benefit, how affordable would you see that in this community?
So just to clarify, is that in terms of a bus fare?
No, this is the rating. The
rating increase. Okay.
Well, just on the fares, given that with a gold card you travel for free, and the fare for most of these services would be $5.
Thank you for that. In my personal view, I think that's reasonably affordable, but obviously there's a lot of affordability considerations for a household to be making, so particularly in these times at the moment that we're living in. But it seems reasonable to me, particularly given the fare policy that's in place for particular groups at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor White. Councillor White.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Greg. Good to see you after your connections with Waikato Regional Council. Look, I just have a few questions. One of them is that some of the other people have mentioned a previous bus service around the Coromandel Peninsula and have suggested that it wasn't well supported. I wondered whether you had any comments to make about that, because I do actually support the idea of public transport to get people to health and education and all of those things that are difficult for them if they don't have a car. But if we have tried it before and it hasn't worked, I'd really like to know what might work better. But also you did mention the grants that you've provided to community health transport providers, and there are 8 of those on the Coromandel and Hauraki area. I just wondered how well you think that they are providing a service, whether you think that that there is anything that we could do that could help in that area. And also there've also been comments about, for instance, the Coromandel Independent Living Trust being willing to assist as feeders to bring people from outlying areas. So I just wondered if you had any comments around all of those things. And one final question was just in relation to Waka Kotahi saying that their funding is already allocated at the moment, and whether you have any comments that you'd like to make in terms of whether we would be better to wait for our next long-term plan in terms of new services.
Thank you. I'll come back. Apologies if I missed one of those, and I'll check in at the end and make sure I've got them all. In terms of the previous bus service around the peninsula, I'm not aware of that service, so or its scope, so I can't really comment on that one. I think it may have been before my time in the Waikato. In terms of community health transport services and DHB's funding for those, they seem to be working well at the moment. Obviously, the recent addition of a new coordinator role is going to help that, and some additional resourcing in terms of a grant that providers can access for support is also going to be very helpful. I think community transport services provide an invaluable service for their local community. They worry a little around their future sustainability, as most of the volunteers are aged over 65 and they don't see many people coming in behind to take over the reins, so to speak, when they get to a point where they can no longer continue. But they provide an invaluable service both locally and to more or to bigger towns, like in this case on the Coromandel, to Thames. And so that's really important. And actually one of those providers is KILT, or Coromandel Independent Living Trust, that we provide a grant to. We don't fully fund them. That's not our role, we believe, to do that, but we do provide them with funding to support the work that they're doing, noting that they look elsewhere too for funding support, sometimes locally, sometimes not, to cover their costs. So in terms of NZTA, I'm not sure, to be honest. I don't think I'm in a position to be able to answer that one. I think things are quite tight in terms of central government funding for transport currently, but I think they have made a commitment to look at alternative options through the funding that they are providing, and they're providing more to those in a whole range of modes, not just public transport. So I think that what you are proposing is in line with that, and it's certainly in line with, as I earlier noted, the emissions reduction plan has an action that has a clear link to this amendment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There being no further questions, I don't see any, nobody online. So thank you, Greg. Thank you for that, and it'll be considered in later this afternoon or later this morning. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So our next submitter is Claire Smith, a resident, and she's also online. Claire.
Yeah, yes, sorry, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very clear, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm actually doing this submission on behalf of my mum and my stepdad. So for background, they are both deaf-blind. They have recently or are in the process of relocating to Thames. Mum is retired My stepdad is nearing retirement age. A significant part of the decision for them to move to Thames, being Auckland-based right now, is around the ease of living in a town like Thames. They rely heavily on public transport here in Auckland, which can be quite a significant logistical issue when you've got to go across the city for hospital appointments, whether it's Green Lane or on further in town. So they're very, very keen in their decision for Thames. They weighed up other areas like Te Araha and Paeroa. They like proximity back to Auckland. Another sort of factor for them was that there is the local Thames shuttle bus, as well as the ability to be able to get across to Waikato if in fact their specialist appointments move across there. So I wanted to give some background around, I guess, their condition and the limiting factor they have in terms of accessing health services in Auckland, and why Thames had a significant reason for them moving. But I also wanted to add in not just the ability to access health services. There's the Thames Hospital, there's the medical centre, they're all walking distance for my mum and John. But it's actually also for them a big factor was the recreational aspect of living in Thames, the fact that they can walk along the coast. So mum has a cane and a cochlear implant. John is a little bit more independent than my mum, but they were really drawn to the recreational aspect. And when we read about the potential that the transport services could extend to other parts of the Coromandel Peninsula, we felt that that would equally have a significant impact on their recreational ability as well. I understand that some of this is for the health access services, but I wanted to add in that component that people who don't necessarily not have a car because of affordability, there's a proportion of people out there that have no transport, will never be able to buy their own car and rely so much on transport. So I guess I just wanted to put a human face to the people behind who would benefit from something like this increase in services. And they would be incredibly grateful if it were extended to include not just the local Thames shuttle bus. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, I think it's good to hear that this region can welcome people with disabilities, and they find it a big advantage in moving from our bigger cities up north. So thank you for putting a lot of context around that. Any questions from our councillors or comments? I think because you've put that across very clearly, succinctly clear, we've got the message loud and clear. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we now move to page 160, and Simon Gascoigne of Go Eco, also Waikato Environment Centre Trust. Simon.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me satisfactorily there.
Yep. Thank you for having your camera on too.
Thank you. Thank you. Tēnā koutou, everybody. As ko Simon Gascoigne toko ingoa, Go Eco Waikato toko mahi. We are a centre, a voice for the environment, a centre for learning, and a catalyst for change. And we're presenting today in relation to the proposal for the bus services there in Waihi and also Thames, and we are in favour of those bus services being provided. We also think it's a good idea for the Regional Council to be able to collect the rates directly to simplify the administration of that process. We need to ensure that the bus services are available for community to access when they need them, especially for our most vulnerable and elderly. And there has actually never been a better time to get on a bus at the moment, given the increase in fuel costs and running costs for a car. I worked out it only cost me about $10 a week here in Hamilton for my commuting costs versus the cost of $10 a day in depreciation, insurance and servicing just for leaving a car in the garage at the moment. Whilst the funding for these bus services may be dependent on additional Waka Kotahi funding, we believe that these services should go ahead even if this funding is not available. We've just hit a record of 165,000 new car registrations in New Zealand per year in 2021. The congestion's getting worse, our emissions are going up, and we've just learned that sea levels are rising at twice the rate that we thought. And also, electric vehicles are not going to get us to where we need to be with our emissions. A lot of us can't afford an electric car, even with a subsidy. Pardon me. It's probably unlikely that the costs of fuel are going to go down. We've got sort of multiple feedback loops starting to come together in terms of costs. And in difficult times, the public might argue that the council should not be spending more when people are doing it tough. But actually, we think this is no time to be cutting back when we have to invest where it will be needed going forward in the future. And for behaviour change, for mode shift to happen, we need to ensure regular, reliable services are in place when people need them. If people are changing for financial reasons, they get financially stretched, and that's when they realise they really need that bus service there. If you put yourself in a position where you suddenly have to give up a car, you imagine what that means for where you live. And we do encourage, people, if they are near a bus route, to try it out, to force yourself. Take a bus one day a week and get over that inertia of change. You tend to adapt more easily using a bus more often. You can save money and you can meet new people and build a sense of community as you go. So this, we believe, is a time to invest in future community where we have those public transport options. Nā reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Any questions, comments, councillors? Andrew.
Thanks for the submission. I think we all want to believe your view about bus patronage as a result. Is that statement based on a reliable data set, or is it wishful thinking? I mean, intuitively it makes sense, but we reportedly have empty buses moving around the Waikato with regular monotony. So while I want to believe that statement, if you've got some data to back it that says we've actually seen that increase in patronage, that would be quite useful.
Thanks.
Thank you. That's a generalisation, I guess, really. But I think with the government's, signalling a shift in terms of the support for public transport with the subsidy, people are going to start realising that running a car is just getting more expensive. I myself, I've been looking at how I've been getting around. I've certainly changed my transport behaviour in recent times.
Thanks, Simon. Thank you for your submission. There being no other questions or comments, thank you for that. It'll be taken on board and we'll be deliberating a little later in the meeting. Pamela Greeley was next, but she's not here just yet because we're slightly ahead of time. So we'll invite John Fryer, page 85 to 94 via Teams. John.
Yep, I'm here.
Very good. You have the floor. If you've got a good link, you can put your camera on. If you've got a good...
You have to tell me.
Yep.
I can't even get it to full screen. I've just got a little box down here. I'm not too proficient with this.
We're getting close.
Something happened then. Are you there?
Yeah, we've got the sound. We just mightn't get the picture, but you can carry on if the picture might take a while to sync. So just leave that as it is and it might sync up. So John, welcome your submission. We're looking forward to it. Page 85. Thank you.
I hope everybody's read it. I've put submissions into other organisations and found when I have discussed this personally with a particular person, they knew nothing about what I was saying. Now, whether they had read it and not taken it in or quite what, I don't know. But basically, I'm from an underprivileged family. I am disabled, so I talk with several hats on. I had a nasty accident 23 years ago and fell off a 2-story house and whacked my head on concrete, splitting my head open, doing 2 lungs and 12 ribs and 5 vertebrae. So I understand disabilities, and some people have talked about that so far. I started a company in 1987, just prior to the share market crash, and I know what that's like. So I know starting up problems. I'm not happy with a ratepayer, that's me, with several hats on, subsidising private companies, which would be involved in sorry, bear with me, which would be involved in running this potential service. I also against it on the angle that our properties are on the east and we shouldn't be subsidising the west, this east-west thing. But I also look at some of the problems the Waikato region has had in establishing services. I had a quick look at the fiasco around Te Huia train service. And the article I read, which was dated December last year, so it may have improved significantly since then, but it told me that the service had earned operating the service 300,000, but they hadn't got particularly anywhere near that in revenue in. I understand the revenue was about 10% of that. So it's costing about 270,000 to run it. Also, I look at the investment in this of 98 million and comparisons that were used, the diesel vehicle costing about $48. In fact, my vehicle, which is a 2.5 litre, it's a 2 litre, this new one. It's 2 years old, and the worst case scenario would consume 18 litres, and the best case scenario, 12 litres to do Hamilton to Papakura. So the current cost of, say, $3 a litre, it's $54 and $36. So the 48 is probably an average at that stage. I also look at the Chamber of Commerce's comments about the 85 or 90 million involved. The 12.2 million came from the Waikato local government. And for the next 3 years, 23 million from the Waikato Regional Council to keep the service running. And for my rates, I think they're around about $3 or $4 for the next 20 years, just to keep that service running. I also look at the Cambridge Velodrome, which I was against at the time. And 29 million was reported in August 2011 to to get up and running, and the 11 million was to come from the local government. I look at the botch up of the rugby park, floodlights, the loss-making World Championships Karapiro, the Hamilton V8s, the Cortland Sports Centre, the 70 million involved. They all have a negative effect on us, the ratepayers, whether it be regional or local within this area. This Cambridge and Te Huia, as far as I'm concerned, was not consulted on fully. The council has my rate address. They send me the rates bill by email, but they never send me any idea that they need to consult on this or consult on that. I only found out about this bus thing through our local ratepayers association sending out a memo. The Cambridge cycle is also added to the negative effect on the welfare of the athletes being there, and it's been called into question whether that's actually the right way to go. And I looked at the press release, and you've got to sometimes look at press releases with a little bit of caution, because they don't always tell you the full story. But there was quite some political input into where that went and how.
Right, John, can you just wrap up, because you've gone past over the time, but just make some final concluding remarks? Thanks.
Yeah, I do object to having a restriction on time when people have got things to say, because I'm probably going to have to leave out quite a bit of comment. I do object to Auckland Council giving you 5 minutes and all the hassles you go to get 5 minutes worth of time. I haven't put a hell of a lot of time into this one because I just don't have it. I've got other pressing things to do. But the consultation for this is lacking. And it seems that this is the way that most councils operate. I have actually asked Auckland Council for copies of who they consulted and how they consulted, but they refused to give it to me. We get added to our rates, I call them land taxes, any whim that council decides to put in place without really considering today the cost of living. I'm a retired.
Yep. John, I think you've made that very clear. I think what you've said is very, very clear to councillors as to your view. Just making a comment on a couple of things there. The Te Huia consultation was, I know, very extensive. It was covered extensively by this council as well as the media. And so there was a lot of feedback on that. Just on the my comment your scenario around the petrol costs, if we're just weighing up the petrol costs, that is only one component of running a car. You know, you've got that capital cost of buying, plus you've got maintenance and other things. So, you know, just aligning the petrol cost is one element. But do Councillor Rimmington comment, please?
Yes, thank you very much for your excellent submission, John, and taking the time. I'd just like to concur with our chairperson. Have you ever taken, like your criticism of the Te Huia, have you ever taken account of the parking when you get to Auckland, how to park your car and the cost?
Sorry.
Or do you not go?
Sorry, didn't quite catch that.
Oh, sorry, John. Often people kind of criticise the Te Huia, that's their democratic right. But also one should take into account perhaps when you get to Auckland, if you have a car, you've got to park it and the cost. Did you take that into account?
Yes, but you don't. When you come to Auckland, you don't necessarily have to come to the centre of the city.
Okay, a good point.
Right, thanks, John.
John, have you used the Te Huia?
I tried to, but it's not satisfactory for us coming from Auckland to Waikato. There's only a 2-hour gap for us to get off the train and get into Hamilton and then get back to the train.
Good point. It's a commuter train, really. Good point, John. John, Justin, also, were you aware that it only takes 64 persons to actually be on the Te Huia, and then it becomes carbon neutral?
Well, I have mixed feelings on how people talk about carbon neutral, to be honest.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Just finally, were you aware that during the holidays we had 400 passengers per day, not just 10 that some persons reported?
How many were freebies like me on the gold card?
Probably most of them, John, but we'll get there on the profit. Let's get people bums on seats to start. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Remington, and thank you, John. I think it's a very engaging conversation. Thanks for that. Now we have, so thanks for John. Pamela, you are in the room here, I understand. Pamela Greeley?
No,
Online. Okay, thank you. Page 95. Pamela, the floor is yours.
Oh, goodness me. I couldn't find page 95. Hang on.
That's all right. We're in your hands.
Cool. I wanted to talk about the potential for a bus service for Coromandel Town to link up with everything. I think that was what my submission was about. I've done a lot of submissions in the past month for various things. Is that the right topic, if you're looking at page 95?
I hope so. We'll let you know if you, of course.
What I really wanted to just make sure, we've got a lot of, I guess, non-domiciled ratepayers in Coromandel Town area, and in fact on the whole of the Coromandel Peninsula, who are obviously not the people who are going to be using this bus service. And this bus service needs to be suitable for people on the peninsula, and in particular for Coromandel Town, to be able to connect to the rest of the country, Thames and Hamilton. So I know that WRC are considering to have a bus, but I would really want to make sure that the bus meets the needs of the people from Coromandel and also from Whitianga. They'll have a similar problem. Whereas at the moment, the bus, if it's the end of either the Thames link or it was suggested maybe it would come as from Ngatea, because there's buses there that could connect up. It would actually still be a little bit like the tourist services that we recently had, which actually we don't have at the moment. In fact, we have no, other than a flight from Whitianga, we have no public transport from the peninsula. But from Coromandel Town, we would like a bus that would allow us to get into Thames and connect with buses to the rest of, I think it's Tauranga and Auckland we can connect to, plus the potential for the service to continue through to Hamilton. But we would like that bus service to be at a time that is convenient for our people in Coromandel at the top of the peninsula as well, because otherwise we get into town too late to do anything, we miss all the connections, and then the bus service becomes unworkable. People don't use the bus service, and the council turns around and says, well, nobody's using it, so we're not going to run it. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Financially, we also know that to look at that bus service on its own, you think it's not financially viable, but the social cost of not having a bus service for rural areas is significant. We're losing people who have to move away for hospital appointments, for schools, for things that if we had a service that would allow them to get to and from at convenient times to them and not convenient times to tourism operators, it would be so much more beneficial. And we would find that our rural communities wouldn't be hemorrhaging people and becoming, in effect, just kind of country town where people just come over from Auckland or from Hamilton or wherever just to spend maybe 6 weeks of the year if we're fortunate. So I would urge proper consideration of how a bus service to and from the Coromandel Peninsula would work. Any questions?
Yep. Councillor Remington first.
Yes, thank you so much for your excellent presentation, which is very disturbing, Pamela. But we've got the chairperson of Connections with us, and I know she's writing furiously in this matter. Tell me, the years that I was in Whitianga, not full time, but at Simpsons Beach, I always looked at that small intercity coach. It looked like a 20-seater that went from Thames to Whitianga, often towing a trailer. And I thought, well, that looks to be about the right size. It always seemed to be a lot of people in it. And furthermore, it was a private operator. I think most people think that Intercity is actually a government. Of course, it's owned by a Whanganui company and do a great service. And how they stay in business, I don't know, but they do. Tell me, is that service not operating at the present time to Whitianga or to Coromandel Township? That is appalling.
It is. So it stopped. So my understanding from a Whitianga perspective is that particular shuttle bus often got booked out from the Whitianga side, because obviously there's a lot more people on that side than there are on the Kapanga side. And then what happened was people decided actually they wanted a bit more luxury. So that they started taking, you know, better services, or a lot of people drive themselves because maybe it's not quite convenient enough. I think it used to be about 7 in the morning, which was quite a good time because it meant that you got to Auckland Airport around about 10. So, you know, you got there for relatively early flights to wherever. So it was a great service, but it stopped. And then we had the Intercity bus, which stopped just before, well, during the pandemic. So we used to have a bus that did do a little bit of a loop, but then that just doesn't come anymore. And from the Coromandel side, we also lost our ferry service. They only come when there's tourists.
Thank you very much for enlightening us.
Thank you, Pamela. Any other comments or questions? Thank you, Pamela. Thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Councillors, we have John Lawson online, page 36. John, floor is yours. We'll just make sure, we know he's online, we're just going to make sure he's unmuted. So he's still muted and we can't unmute him. If you can hear us, John, unmute. Otherwise, we'll take a tea break and then come back and try and connect. Yes, I think we'll go to adjournment for a tea break and we'll return in 15 minutes time. So we'll return at 20 minutes to 11 and hopefully staff can connect with John and set him up for then. Thank you. When meeting's adjourned.